The release of this episode on February 10th, 2025 will mark a devastating milestone. The 35th anniversary of possibly the most horrific crime the state of New Mexico has ever seen. Early on a Saturday morning, the community of Las Cruces, New Mexico would have its sense of safety and serenity shattered forever when two gunmen entered a family-owned small business and gunned down 7 people execution style. Miraculously, there were survivors, including a brave 12-year-old girl who found the courage to call for help and save others, despite being critically wounded herself. While this case has had a bit more news coverage than some of the other cases I've covered, it hasn't amounted to answers. In fact, there have never been any named suspects. My hope is that in honoring the lives lost and changed forever in this senseless act of violence, the conversation will continue and someone who knows something will finally come forward. My name is Megan, and each week on A Simpler Time True Crime, I cover older unsolved cases and challenge the idea that a simpler time means a safer time. This week, I'm bringing to you the unsolved Las Cruces bowling alley massacre. Sitting just a 45-minute drive from the Mexican border, the city of Las Cruces, New Mexico has grown substantially over the years. Las Cruces is actually the second largest city in New Mexico, behind Albuquerque. This was news to me because whenever I think of New Mexico, I think of Albuquerque and Santa Fe, but Las Cruces is actually bigger than Santa Fe. Las Cruces also has very close proximity to El Paso, Texas. Back in 1990, its population was about half of what it is now, between 55,000 and 60,000 people. It was considered pretty safe. For context, in 1989, the city of Las Cruces had 2 homicides for the whole year. It was a mixture of young families and retirees and mostly quiet. In addition to there being plenty of chain businesses along the main drag, there were plenty of small family-owned and operated businesses as well, and one of those was Las Cruces Bowl. It was located at 1201 East Amador Avenue in a busy part of town. The business was your quintessential family-run place. It was owned by a man named Ron Senek, and all of his children worked there. His sons bartended, his daughter kept the books and managed the place, and his grandkids would spend time there helping out in one capacity or another. On Saturday morning, February 10th, 1990, the morning started off normal. A youth league was set to begin at 9 a.m. at Las Cruces Bowl, so at 8 a.m. it wasn't open yet, but a couple of workers were already there getting the place ready. 34-year-old Stephanie Senek was there in the bowling alley's office preparing to open the business. She was the owner's daughter. There were leagues there the night before, so she was handling the cash and bookkeeping related to that and preparing for the busy Saturday ahead. With her was her 12-year-old daughter, Melissa Repass, and Melissa's friend, 13-year-old Amy Hauser. Melissa and Amy used to hang out at the bowling alley just to help out in different capacities, and they would help out at the bowling alley's daycare. Also present was 33-year-old Ida Olguin, one of the bowling alley cooks. She normally worked evenings, but had switched this time to the day shift to help out a colleague and to free up her evening to play bingo with her mother. She was working in the kitchen, washing dishes, and preparing food for the bowling alley snack bar. Steve Senek, Stephanie's brother and son of the owner, was not working that day. He had Saturday class and had forgotten that he had left his book bag at the bowling alley from his shift the night before. At around 8:15, Steve showed up to Las Cruces Bowl to retrieve his bag. As he parked, he saw 2 men loitering in the eastern part of the parking lot, off to the side of the bowling alley entrance. Steve entered the bowling alley and felt uncomfortable by the men loitering, and he made a point to tell Stephanie as he was grabbing his backpack that she needs to keep the doors locked until the business opens. She sort of acknowledged him and what he was saying, but she was busy doing the work she was doing. Steve left and went on with his day, but before he did, he told Stephanie one more time to lock up. He would later say in an interview that he doubled down on this because of how uncomfortable he was with the men in the parking lot. At the same time, Melissa and Amy were hungry and asked Ida if she would make them food, but she wasn't feeling it. She was busy, she just got there, it wasn't even her normal shift, and she was trying to prepare for that giant leak that was about to walk in within the hour. So the girls decided to ask Stephanie for some money to take to the vending machine. At 8:20 a.m., cash in hand, they gleefully walked out of the office to make their way over to the vending machines. But that's when everything would change forever. They never made it to the vending machines because right through the front doors walked two men, one who appeared to be older than the other. Melissa barely had time to ask if she could help them when the guns were drawn. The two men ordered Melissa and Amy into the office with Stephanie at gunpoint, wielding .22 caliber guns in their direction. The men instructed the three to sit on the ground. The older of the two men stayed with them, while the younger man walked through the rest of the bowling alley. It was then that he found Ida and ordered her at gunpoint into the office. He told her, quote, "Come with me. This is a holdup." He then proceeded to strike her in the back of the head multiple times with the gun. Ida followed his orders and walked into the office with the others. Once in the office, she was forced to sit as well. Just as a quick side note, when I first heard about this case, I heard about the office and I pictured this really small room. But after viewing the footage from the 2009 documentary Nightmare in Las Cruces, it's quite a bit larger of an area than I was expecting. So I'm just mentioning that for your visual purposes. So from there, the two men started rifling through the office. One of them ordered them all to put their heads down, while the other demanded that Stephanie open the safe. She did this, and they grabbed around $5,000 or a little less, which was notably less than what was actually in the safe. The men then started frantically going through the cabinets of the office as if they were looking for something. Just as all of this was going on, somebody else arrived at the bowling alley. It was 26-year-old Steven Turan. Steve was the bowling alley mechanic, and he also did lots of other little odd jobs. He couldn't find a babysitter that day, and his wife was at beauty school taking cosmetology classes, so he had his two girls with him. 6-year-old Paula Holguin, his stepdaughter, and 2-year-old Valerie Turan. Paula and Ida were not related, the name was just a coincidence. As soon as they walked in, the gunman ordered Steve and the girls on the ground as well. At this point, the gunmen were frantic, and the perception was that they could not find something that they were looking for. This was all happening at a very fast pace, and before long, the next command was for all 7 people to kneel and put their heads on the ground. The next thing they knew, shots were ringing out. The two gunmen fired over 25 shots, shooting each victim execution style. They then lit some papers on the desk on fire and took off. Witnesses outside of the bowling alley would later come forward and share that they saw the two assailants flee on foot in the westward direction from the bowling alley. Inside, smoke began filling up the office, and nobody was moving. But amazingly, 12-year-old Melissa Repass was still alive. She knew she had been hurt, but she could vaguely hear some sounds coming from some of the others. Seeing the situation was grave, Melissa knew she had to try to get help. She saw the gunmen run out of the office, but she couldn't be certain that they had left the bowling alley altogether. If they came back in and found her, they could have finished the job. But the 12-year-old found the courage and bravery to make her way over to the office phone and do something she had just learned about in school the week before. Dial 911. Dispatcher Jim Hash answered the phone that morning. I'm going to play the 911 call for you next, but I want to forewarn you that the call is about 4 minutes long and is extremely difficult to listen to. So listen with care, and if you know this is going to be too difficult for you, skip ahead. But the content of the call really shows you just how amazing Melissa was on that day.
Emergency.
Please help me.
Whoa, slow down.
We were all shot in a holdup.
Okay. Where are you at?
1201 East Amador, Cruces Bowl.
Las Cruces Bowl?
Yes.
Okay, and there were shots fired?
Yes.
Oh.
All of us were hurt.
Huh?
All of us were hurt. I think I'm the only one conscious.
All of you were hurt? Okay, we'll get an ambulance rolling.
Please.
Okay, what's your name?
Melissa Repass. Please hurry.
Okay, Melissa, we've got them dispatched. Did you see who did it?
No, sir. They told us all to get down. They shot me 5 times.
Okay, we'll get them rolling, Melissa. Just hang on, take a deep breath. We've got patrol units en route. How many people are hurt?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
7 people are hurt?
Yes, I think.
7 subjects hurt. Okay, Melissa.
It hurts.
It hurts. Okay, Melissa, I've got an ambulance and I've got the police officers en route. They'll be with you just shortly. Okay? You didn't see what any of the men were wearing?
All of our money.
You didn't see what any kind of the men were wearing or anything?
No.
Nothing, huh? They just walked in?
Uh-huh.
Do you know if they were black men, white men?
One black man. They're both black.
2 black men?
Yeah.
Okay. No, they've left. 2 black males.
Please hurry.
Okay. It's okay, Melissa.
There's a fire, too.
There's a fire?
Right on the desk. They're going to burn us up.
Are the men still there?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't know. They put us in the office.
They put you in the office?
Yes, I need a fire engine, too. Please help me.
10-2. Okay, Melissa. She said they locked them in the office. She doesn't know if they're still there or not.
The door's open. There's a fire.
It's on Amador, yeah.
Please
Can you
help.
smell smoke, Melissa?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay.
Can I get the fire
Fire
extinguisher?
department, too?
Yes.
She says she smells smoke. They may have lit the building on fire.
No, it is on fire.
It is on fire.
It is.
Okay, Melissa.
Can I go get
Stand
the...
by utility 1.
Oh, ow.
Okay, Melissa, we've got them coming, hon. We've got them coming. If somebody...
Sorry, my mommy.
Okay, Melissa. There's a police officer there now, okay?
There is?
Yes, there is. He's going to try and find you.
We're in the office. Just tell
Stand by,
me.
I have 33 traffic.
God,
Okay.
I'm gonna die. I know I'm gonna
Hold
die.
on, Melissa. We've got the ambulance coming. They're just down the street. Huh? She advises all 7 are shot. They're injured. They're in the office. Where's the office at, Melissa?
You go in the door, in the front desk, and then you take a right, and we're right in the building.
Okay. She says you go in to the first desk, take a right, and they're right there at the office. Okay, I'm giving the directions on how to get to you, to the police officers that are there.
Oh, my God. Please help me.
They're helping you, Melissa. We've got them rolling. Okay? You got to be brave. Got to be strong now. Okay?
Oh, God. It's going to burn us right now.
Okay. Can you see flames?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's burning us.
Okay.
Oh, I got bullets in my feet.
Okay.
Got bullets in my head.
The bullets in your head, too?
I can't. None of them are talking. I'm still here.
Go ahead. I hear the officers telling you to get out.
I
Get out.
can't. There's nobody else.
Was that the police officer telling you to get out?
Yeah.
Then get out.
Okay.
Okay?
Ooh, yeah. It's a lot to listen to. Before I get into what happened next, I think it's worth noting how incredibly brave and informative Melissa was. She was able to give some description of the men, though more on that in a minute. She was able to share what had happened, what was needed, give information about the fire, give the address and directions to the office. Even though you can tell she is panicked, she is still composed enough to get information out there to help, and this is a 12-year-old girl. She even corrected him on little details like when he said the building might be on fire, and she said, no, it is on fire. And when he says that they are locked in the office, she makes sure to say, no, the office is open. And huge kudos to Jim Hash. He had never gotten a call like this in his lifetime. He was clear and calm and led everyone where they needed to go. He was later interviewed for the documentary Nightmare in Las Cruces, and he got choked up as he walked through the call again. He remembers vividly the moment that will always stick with him, where he felt the gravity of the situation and also the innocence of the child on the other end of the call. It was when he asked how many people were hurt, and instead of just giving a number, she counted them out. He just got really choked up, and it still sticks with him to this day. Las Cruces police officer Bill Schatzman had been patrolling nearby and was the first officer on scene. He and Jim recalled how it took some convincing to get Melissa to come out, something you can hear at the end of the call. Melissa explained later that she was in such a state of trauma and was trying hard to follow Jim's instructions, and he had told her to just hang tight and stay on the phone with him, so she was scared to hang up. She was also worried about leaving the others as the fire was taking off. Officer Bill Schatzman was the first one to help Melissa out. He recalled through tears in the documentary that when Melissa saw him, she had this look on her face of, "Thank God you're here." She was correct in her assessment of how many times she had been shot, and this is graphic, but she actually had fingers dangling, and she had at least one bullet to her head, so she had her hands on her head, and the bullets had gone through even her fingers. When she got into the ambulance, she actually requested that he join her, and based on the interview, you can still tell how much that touched him to this day. The police wasted no time calling in reinforcements. By 8:37, backup had arrived. The scene was absolutely terrible. They had to quickly assess who was alive and who had already died and try to put the fire out. Crime scene and evidence preservation is important, but it's secondary to saving lives, so first responders really needed to do what they had to do to try to help save some lives, and part of what that meant was that there was significant crime scene contamination. 13-year-old family friend Amy Hauser, 26-year-old mechanic Stephen Turan, and his 6-year-old daughter Paula Olguin were all dead at the scene. 2-year-old Valerie was still holding on, as was Ida Olguin, Stephanie Senek, and Melissa Repass, though they were all seriously injured. Within moments of arriving at the hospital, 2-year-old Valerie succumbed to her injuries. Audrey, Stephen's wife and the girl's mother, was at school that day when she heard there had been a shooting at the bowling alley, and she rushed to the scene. There is news footage from 1990 where you can see Audrey arriving to the scene, and she's panicked. She's standing there with her hands on her head, frantic. She's then moved to the front of a police car to sit down. She was told that her husband Steve and her daughter Paula were both killed, and that Valerie had been rushed to the hospital and she needed to get there. Audrey recalled in that documentary, Nightmare in Las Cruces, that she said the Hail Mary 20 times on the drive to the hospital. When she arrived, she asked to be with Valerie, and that's when they broke the news to her that Valerie had not survived. Audrey asked if when Valerie passed, if they were working on her or if somebody had held her and comforted her. The hospital social worker told her that when they realized she wasn't going to make it, one of the nurses just held her while she passed. Amy Hauser's mother, Gloria, was working at a local grocery store when she heard the news of the shooting from a coworker. When she got there and found out Amy had been a victim, she said it was as if the world collapsed on her. All she could think of is how and why. Amy's stepfather, Anthony Woods, has struggled through the years as he was the person who dropped her off that day. In an interview with the Santa Fe New Mexican, he discussed how his wife had left early for work around 7 a.m. and that he had dropped Amy at the bowling alley around 8:10. This was an hour earlier than normal, but it was the only time he was able to drop her off, or else she wouldn't have had a ride. He recalled, quote, "We had a particularly good morning of laughing and joking on the way to work. That morning, I gave her a big hug and told her she was getting just too darn pretty, growing up and becoming a young woman. We were talking about her job, and she would say, "Not bad for a 13-year-old." And I smiled at her and said, "Good working," just like that. And I made sure as I watched her go in. In the same article, though, he expressed that after watching her walk in, he had an odd feeling. Quote, "I remember it struck me as odd that the doors were open that early. I was anticipating having to get out and get my keys out and bang on the window for her. I remember that flashed through my mind. Then the door opened. And it was dark inside. That also hit me. I saw that it was dark in the bowling alley, and for a split second, I thought of going in. Then I saw Stephanie's car and thought, she'll be all right. I've gone through this whole thing, and I've been real upset because I thought, what if she walked in on it, and she called for me and I didn't hear it? There's no guilt, but there is a lot of torment in it all." End quote. Of course, we know that isn't how it played out because we have Melissa's eyewitness testimony, but I feel so sorry for him. And this is just my typical plug I make on this podcast, reminding the men listeners out there that you can have intuition too. I always say, call it what you like, intuition, premonition, Sophia the Holy Spirit, but men can be in tune with this too. And I believe both Amy's stepfather, Anthony, and Steve Senek had it on that day. Before we keep going, let's recap a bit of what we know this far because I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you. 4 people so far have died. Audrey Turan lost her whole family that day, her husband Stephen, and her daughters Paula and Valerie. 13-year-old Amy Hauser also died on scene. 33-year-old cook Ida Olguin, 34-year-old manager and owner's daughter Stephanie Senek, and 12-year-old daughter of Stephanie, Melissa Repass, are all at the hospital in critical condition. The timeline for this morning is that Amy is dropped off at 8:10 a.m. Steve Senek comes and retrieves his backpack at 8:15. Amy and Melissa get money and head out to the vending machines at 8:20, and that's when the attack began. Sometime in the next couple of minutes, Stephen Turan arrives with his daughters. By 8:29, Melissa has placed the 911 call, which lasts just over 4 minutes when the first officer arrives on scene. And by 8:37 a.m., backup has arrived. It's hard to imagine all of this playing out that quickly. It's like making your head spin just thinking about it. At least, that's what it did to me. Within an hour of the 911 call, police had set up 10 roadblocks, and they had an idea of the suspects they were looking for. So I told you we were going to revisit Melissa's description, and that's important. If you listen to the 911 call, you'll remember she identified them as 2 black men. Steve Senek also had eyewitness identification because he had seen the 2 men outside before going in to retrieve his backpack. They were able to get some identifying characteristics out of Melissa, and then they combined the information to what Steve reported, and they concluded with almost certainty that Steve and Melissa were describing the same 2 men. They had what Steve described as almost uncanny overlaps in their descriptions, and in the end, it was determined that these men were most likely dark-skinned Hispanic men. A composite sketch of each man was created, and they can be found on our Instagram at simplertimecrimepod. According to the Albuquerque Journal, one suspect is described as a Hispanic male, about 45 to 50 years old, 5'6", medium build, 135 to 140 pounds, with a dark complexion, black hair worn combed back, and brown eyes. He was last seen wearing a green and white plaid sport coat, dark green or brown pants, and black cowboy boots. The other suspect is described as a Hispanic male about 29 to 30 years old, 5'10", about 170 pounds, with a dark complexion and dark kinky hair. He was last seen wearing a dark jacket and pants and possibly a red shirt. He is believed to be armed with a 6 or 8-inch blue steel revolver. The immediate manhunt was massive. I mentioned the roadblocks, and a lot of them focused on the I-10 corridor. The location of Las Cruces made containing these suspects crucial because it was very easy to commit a crime and not only hop over into Texas and duck away, but more importantly, it was pretty easy to cross the border into Mexico. According to that same article in the Albuquerque Journal, the manhunt included 120 officers from Las Cruces Police, New Mexico State Police, Doñana County Sheriff's Department, New Mexico State University Police, U.S. Customs Service, Border Patrol, Mesilla and Hatch Police, and the DEA. 6 aircraft and helicopters were also used too. Las Cruces Police Department Captain Fred Rubio said he had 80% of his department working the case. In a weird chain of events, there was actually another completely unrelated homicide in Las Cruces that day. And so they did have to commit some of their focus to responding and investigating to that crime as well, and have some staff available to respond to potential emergencies. It's just crazy to think that there were 2 homicides in all of Las Cruces in 1989, and here on this one February day in 1990, there is an unrelated homicide and a mass shooting. And if you're thinking to yourself, Megan, how can you be so sure they're unrelated? Because I get it, that's how my mind works too. A man who did not fit the description of the gunman was quickly apprehended in the other homicide. He confessed and said it was a drug transaction that had gone bad. And actually, that same Saturday evening, there was another shooting, a drive-by vehicle shooting that police described as gang-related. But this was so unheard of, one of the officers actually said to the media, there has to be a full moon this weekend. A couple of hours into the investigation, the roadblock seemed to pay off. Police pulled over a vehicle with 4 Hispanic men in it. The men somewhat fit the description, and they had a whole lot of cash on them, over $12,000 in cash in the vehicle. Now, Melissa Repass and Steven Senek described 2 gunmen, but police aren't ruling out that they had help. But just as they got excited for this lead, their hopes were deflated when Steven comes to the scene and says that these men are unequivocally not the men he saw that morning. By evening, they lifted the roadblocks, and on Sunday, Las Cruces detectives shared they felt there was a good chance that the suspects could be hiding out right in town, and that they had connections to the local area. And at this juncture, they're just thinking this was a robbery. Money was taken. The one suspect said to Ida, "This is a holdup." And police also got to thinking of another crime. You see, there was actually one other homicide in Las Cruces in 1990. In early January of 1990, a gas station attendant was tied up, shot execution style, and the gas station was set on fire. So they had to consider the connection to that crime, where robbery also seemed to be a motive. And if you think about the timing, there had been a ton of Friday night leagues, and so the bowling alley was more likely to have cash on hand than other times or days of the week. By Sunday evening, the 3 surviving victims had their conditions upgraded at the hospital. While they were still in serious condition, they did seem to be improving and out of the woods. Police were interviewing everyone possible, and it was within a few days where they began to look outside of the robbery motive and consider something else, all because of the interactions with the bowling alley owner. Ron Senek, Stephanie's father and Melissa's grandfather, owned Las Cruces Bowl, and he had owned other bowling alleys and businesses as well at different times. He had been out of town in Arizona at the time of the shooting at a golf tournament, but he quickly made his way back. And his demeanor and some of his behavior raised eyebrows. There were a couple of locals interviewed in the documentary Nightmare in Las Cruces, and they reported that Ron wasn't always the most well-liked person in the room. But being bristly and honestly kind of a jerk to people doesn't typically result in your family getting shot up. But police were interested in if there was more to that and if Ron was actually a target. Police Captain Fred Rubio said to the Journal, quote, "All I can say is we confronted him with that type of question, if anyone had anything against him or his family. From the beginning of the incident, we've looked at the possibility the people came in to do harm to him or his family for whatever reason. This case is still wide open," end quote. Ron was adamant that he was not involved in any type of activity that would put a target on his back or his family's back. He said in an interview, quote, "I've just had a lesson in criminology, I guess you'd say, from talking to the police. In a situation like this, there are two avenues they go down. Joe Blow robbers simply seeking money, while the other is they planned their attack for some other reason. The Joe Blow robbery I can live with. The planned attack scares the hell out of me, and I'm fearless. I feel it was a simple robbery because we've had robbers come before," end quote. What he's referring to there is that since the 32-lane bowling alley opened in 1984, they had a couple of overnight break-ins, and so he felt it was just like that, but this time with victims. But others were not as certain, including people like Anthony Turan, the brother of Stephen, and Gloria Woods, the mother of Amy Hauser. Anthony stated in a later interview, quote, "You know, my brother and I used to go to that bowling alley. We knew Ron Senek, the owner, and we noticed he had friends and buddies often hanging out there who seemed strange to us. Do I think it was only a robbery that led to those deaths? Not really. I mean, if those two men could look a little 2-year-old girl in the eye and then shoot her in the forehead, they were after something other than money. I believe they were sending a message." And what he said is true. An examination of Valerie Turan found that she had been shot in the forehead at point-blank range, and that somebody likely had to hold her and put a gun to her forehead and look her in the eye and shoot her. A literal baby. It's just incomprehensible to think about. Police were also finding things that felt off about the robbery angle. Yes, money was taken, but a fair amount of money was left in the safe. Why not take all of it? And survivors like Ida recalled the men seemingly looking for something else and not finding it. Were they looking for drugs? Others also pointed out that usually if it was purely robbery as the motive, they would wear masks. Why gun down every single witness? Why shoot a baby who won't even remember, who barely speaks as it is? Something that amplified this theory about the drugs was one of the other Senek sons I haven't mentioned yet, a man named R.J. Senek. He was a bartender at the bowling alley. Some tipsters came forward and shared that R.J. had a drug addiction, specifically cocaine, and that he had some of those dealings right in the bar. What that means exactly, we don't know. We don't know if that just means he was selling cocaine out of the bowling alley, or keeping drugs there, or just buying them. It's all speculation. But if there was cocaine, that could have been what the assailants were looking for and couldn't find that day. RJ was not forthcoming with investigators. They interrogated him, and he had very little to say. If he has additional knowledge that would help the case, we won't ever know, because he died in 1997 of what's been reported as a drug overdose. I want to pivot back to the public opinion of Ron Senek for a moment. He did not do himself any favors in the steps he took next. Less than a week after the shooting, he reopened the bowling alley. He actually invited reporters in and proudly stood in the office and showed off the new carpet he had put in. The charred desk and other remnants of the crime scene were just sitting in the lobby waiting to be trashed, like artifacts of the chilling crime on display. At this point, the survivors were still hospitalized. The community was reeling, and people just thought this was too soon. Ron had a different perspective. He viewed the reopening as a message to the killers that the community of Las Cruces would not be bullied into a new normal, that they were going to resume life and appreciate life and move on in spite of this tragedy. He also said in an interview that he was feeling a lot of pressure from people who were bowling in the leagues to get back going. After taking reporters on a tour of the alley and showing them where all the crime took place, he went on record to say, quote, "Let us not allow this tragedy to affect us with fear alone, but rather let us strengthen our resolve to bond as a community and let us find ways to heal our wounds. Let's bring us together as a community rather than be dismantled. We are determined not to allow this insane act of two individuals to permanently alter our lifestyles and the entire community. We are dedicated to restoring the feeling of neighborhood and the wholesome family atmosphere of Las Cruces Bowl. Many people were put off by this, and police and Ron had very different perceptions of Ron's actions and behavior following the crime. Ron described in an interview to the documentary crew that he had been to the police station every day looking for updates, fully cooperating. The police, on the other hand, said he was mostly absent, that they would have to track him down to come in, and that he was often combative. Ron did say he was offended that they seemed to be focusing in on him and viewing him as a suspect in some way, though I should note that the Las Cruces Police Department has never named a suspect in the case, period. Ron recalled how he did 3 lie detector tests and that the final one seemed to mess up because he was only supposed to answer yes or no, and when they asked him about potential involvement in illegal activities or organized crime, he answered, hell no. Now, police haven't divulged information about the context of these polygraph exams to the media, so my takeaway based on Ron's statement that he made was that his answer to that question showed deception. But that's my speculation and my conclusion drawn from his comments. We don't know for sure. Weeks went by without many new leads. Investigators followed up on tons of tips relating to the suspects. In March, the TV show Unsolved Mysteries came into town. The producers shared they normally don't get involved in cases this soon, but they felt that maybe they could help. Because of the brutality of the crime, they decided not to reenact the actual shooting and only reenact the scene leading up and some of the subsequent investigation. This did bring in a bunch of calls about potential suspects who may fit the description, but none of them led anywhere. Police were beginning to worry that the suspects had crossed into Mexico or were long out of town. Then, just before the 1-year anniversary of the crime, the Las Cruces community was once again in shock as they learned something new about Ron Senek. I want to take a moment to thank you for tuning into this week's episode. My podcast is growing thanks to everyone who is talking about it and sharing it with friends. I post a lot on Instagram, TikTok, and I'm starting to do a little more on YouTube. So make sure to follow those accounts, interact with the posts. I love to chat with people in the comments and in DMs. I stay pretty active. If you're enjoying the work I'm doing, please leave a 5-star review and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and tell a friend. Now, back to the show. At the end of 1990, Ron had put the bowling alley up for court-ordered auction due to the business folding. It was revealed that he had multiple loans out on the property and that he owed people more than $2 million in debt. In January of 1991, he stood by solemnly as the business was auctioned off to a new owner. In the crowd that day was Amy Hauser's mother, Gloria Woods, holding up a picket sign that read, "Non-payment may have caused the loss of 4 lives. Justice? ? It became clear that there were 2 schools of thought. Ron felt that the community was blaming him and his family for what happened at the alley that day. Stephen Senek, the son who retrieved his backpack that morning of the murders, said in the documentary that he gets angry that every time the case gets brought up, people seem to point the finger at his family. He believes it was a brazen and tragic robbery and that his family is being villainized unfairly. Then you can see, based on words spoken and unspoken, that the families of Steve and the girls, as well as Amy Hauser's family, all have a different perspective and think that there was much more at play here than just a simple robbery. Time passed, and the case quickly grew cold despite the fact that investigators were still devoting an unprecedented amount of man-hours. A bunch of the original investigators were interviewed for the documentary A Nightmare in Las Cruces, and you can tell it was just an obsession for them. Not only that, you could see that they almost took a parental role in Melissa's life. A lot of them were men, and they kind of had this fatherly presence when they spoke about her. They were just in awe of her bravery, and I am too. The surviving victims worked through their injuries towards recovery. Ida Olguin ended up spending nearly 6 months in the hospital. All 3 victims were traumatized and had difficulty leading a normal life. They were just constantly in fear of their lives. When Ida was interviewed, she did say she believed she saw the men in the bowling alley on another evening at least once, and that they weren't bowling. They were just sitting around watching the place. This gives credence to the idea that these men had cased the place prior to that morning and that it wasn't a random act, which, no matter what theory you believe, I think that part is mostly agreed upon by all parties. In 1991, Melissa was recognized in a nationwide competition by Hasbro Toys and honored for her bravery in calling 911 that day. Her mother said Melissa still didn't realize that she had done anything that special, and she was really touched by this. In March of 1991, something eerie happened in Albuquerque. 55-year-old James Chapman of Rio Rancho was working as a custodian at a bowling alley early on a Monday morning before it opened. Suddenly, a man burst in and shot him. Robbery did not appear to be a motive. In fact, they couldn't figure out anybody who would want to harm him for any reason. This time, there were 2 other employees tucked away who witnessed the crime and saw the suspect, a white man, and they saw him take off running. James Chapman died that morning after being life-flighted to the hospital. Though this bowling alley was a couple of hours away, this was another morning shooting, and wouldn't you know, this bowling alley used to be owned by Ron Senek before he had sold it off because of financial problems. As much as that sounds way too much to be a coincidence, it turns out it was. A man who had gone on a multi-state crime spree was arrested and convicted of the crime, and it was deemed unrelated to the Las Cruces bowling alley murders. In December of 1991, police in Las Cruces connected with investigators in Austin, Texas, over a crime they were investigating there that had eerie similarities. On December 6, 1991, 4 teenage girls were working together to close up a frozen yogurt shop in Austin, Texas. At around midnight, police responded to a fire at the yogurt shop, and when they walked in, they were met with a grisly scene. The 4 young girls had been tied up, shot execution style, and the yogurt shop set on fire. This case is infamously known as the Austin Yogurt Shop Murders and is still one of Texas's most haunting unsolved cases. But as many similarities as the crimes had, police ultimately decided they weren't connected. The next lead came from a confidential informant named Irma. She had stated that she had harbored the 2 men after the crime. She even talked about how the men had looked outside and saw the helicopters and sneered and laughed about how they were hiding right under police's noses. She knew things about the crime that only people who had been there would know, and so they figured she must have gotten information from the killers. She passed a polygraph test about this tip, but police noticed that she was definitely under the influence of narcotics, so they could only take what she said with a grain of salt. Years later, she went through a period of getting clean, and in her sobriety, investigators re-interviewed her. She recanted her previous statements and said that she had told that whole story to appear hardened on the street and carry clout, hoping it could help her get connected with drugs easier. Investigators said that they talked to Irma several times over the years, and she only recanted one of those times. Unfortunately, Irma became addicted to drugs again and overdosed, so she is no longer available to be interviewed. This is just my impression, but based on the interviews I saw with the detectives, they seemed to think Irma was telling the truth in her original story. The years passed without leads, and those left in the wake of the tragedy have continued to live life without answers and with just the memories of their loved ones. Stephen Turan was a U.S. National Guardsman who was going to school at New Mexico State University and had planned to take the Las Cruces police exam at the end of the month. He was a devoted father to the girls and always encouraged his wife Audrey in her pursuits. She made a point to finish school after the shootings to honor what Steve had wanted for her. Paula was known as a protective big sister of Valerie. She would let her little toddler sister always play with her and her friends, and she didn't let her out of her sight. She hoped to be a cheerleader and had a little New Mexico State University cheer outfit. Audrey recalled how one time the cheerleaders noticed her at a game and called her to come down and cheer with them. Audrey said that was probably the greatest moment of Paula's life. Valerie had serious big brown eyes and was known for being rather stoic like her father. She was cautious and shy, and she took a while to warm up to people. Audrey described how she can still feel Valerie's spirit sometimes, and how she feels like they both are on the same page, that they got cheated out of so many years together as mother and daughter. Amy Hauser was so incredibly smart and mature. She loved that she kind of got to try on having a job at the alley, and she took pride in it. She would hand out shoes and eat for free and help with the kids, and she felt strong for having this responsibility. She went to Catholic school, and she was connected to her faith. She had lots of friends and was a great big sister to her siblings. Her mother said her siblings had a terrible time adjusting to life without her. She said in an interview, quote, "They cry and cling to my leg and run after the car as I drive away, stuff they never did before. They're afraid for me to leave them. They're afraid I'm not going to come back either." End quote. The Woods both described their lives as difficult to function and do everyday things, and that each memory was painful because they knew they couldn't have any more of them. Still, Mrs. Wood said she was grateful for the short time that God gave her with Amy. She remained skeptical of the robbery motive. She said, quote, "And you still say, why? You just can't think that anyone would sit there and shoot children in the back of the head, not feeling anything, and walk away for a few lousy dollars. Or was it that? You think, why would they do it for that? Is there something more? They could have just taken the money." The survivors encountered their own struggles as well. Stephanie Senek dealt with her trauma differently than her family. She found it cathartic to talk about, and her brothers and father did not want to discuss it, so they had a totally different way of dealing with things, which is common. She had severe PTSD. Melissa recalled how her mom used to be the fun one, and how after it she became fearful and reclusive. Compounding the tragedy, Stephanie died suddenly in 1999 from complications relating to injuries from the shooting. She was only in her early 40s. Melissa then had to overcome the loss of her mother, who she described as a dear friend to her as well. She has physical and emotional scars from the shooting and deals with severe PTSD to this day. So does Ida. She was so traumatized from the events that day that she hasn't been able to work a job since and deals with permanent physical and emotional injuries. The case has stalled many times over the years and continues to. In the early 2000s, Anthony Turan, the brother of Steve Turan, got extremely active in bringing the case to the limelight again. He felt that the community was moving on, but they still didn't have answers. Anthony described in an interview how when he got to the hospital that day and he found out about his brother, he instinctively punched a hole in the hospital wall. And at that moment, his sister-in-law Audrey came over to him. And despite just finding out that she lost her husband and 2 little girls, she showed concern about his hand and wanted to make sure that he was okay. He said it was in that moment that something switched, and he decided that he needed to table his grief and be strong for his family and take care of Audrey. He said that Steve had once asked if anything should ever happen to him, that Anthony step up and care for his girls. A painful request now, given the circumstances. But he found that the best way he could honor his brother is to keep the case going and push for answers. He said in a 2014 interview, quote, "To be honest, I think about that event every day. I have Steven's National Guard photo sitting in my room, and I look at him every morning when I get up. He was 25 years old in the photo, and his staring dark eyes seemed to be conveying a message to me saying, 'Don't ever give up. Do the right thing.' And that's why I will never quit trying to find those responsible for these murders. That's why I will always try to do the right thing. Anthony and others connected to the case work hard to keep in touch with current investigators, as well as the original detectives, to keep continuity and to keep the case in the spotlight, to make sure the case is never forgotten, especially while it's still awaiting answers. On Wednesday, February 5th, 2025, the Las Cruces Police Department announced that it was offering a $25,000 reward for the 35th anniversary of the shooting. The reward is for information that could lead to the identity of the two suspects behind the shooting. If you have any information on the horrible events in Las Cruces that day, no detail is too small. Tips can be provided anonymously by calling Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477. Tips can also be provided online at nmcrimestoppers.org or through the Crime Stoppers app, P3 Tips. The app is available through the App Store and on most devices. Thank you for joining me for another week of A Simpler Time True Crime. Episodes are released every Monday. If you have an older unsolved case that you think I should cover, email me at simplertimecrimepod@gmail.com. I'm eager to partner with more families directly in covering their families' cases, so if that's you, please feel free to contact me as well. And as always, thank you so much for listening.